But I think we're beginning to see the outlines of a second problem, and that is what it means when your supply chain is disrupted. And we all just left a meeting of the entire Senate with leaders in our country in healthcare, and what's becoming evident and apparent is that one of the impediments to the widespread availability of testing is a supply chain unpredictability. It isn't just the tests. If you don't have cotton swabs, if you don't have protective gear for the lab technicians or the basic ingredients needed for the test, you're going to have a problem in conducting those tests. And from our perspective is the role that small business can play structurally now and for years to come in ensuring that these sorts of supply chain disruptions don't become a national threat to the country. A lot of it will be focused on China because that is where a lot of this activity has gone. But it's not just China. If you're India, if you're South Korea, if you're a country that also makes these things and you're facing this threat, you're going to hoard it. You're going to act in the best interest of your nation, and that's understandable. We need to start acting in the best interest of our nation in these regards, and so that's important. On the supply chain issue, I think the backdrop to our general economy, even before, and this committee issued a report a year ago that warned about it, even before all of this, is that we are dangerously reliant, in particular, on China for the production of critical goods, and that includes goods, as I've already outlined, that are needed to fight the coronavirus. And I think we rely on far more goods than we know. And part of the economic pain that's going to be inflicted on the country as a result of these disruptions will be directly related to disruptions in the supply chain because of an outbreak that shut down factories that end up impacting the availability of important consumer goods. Just a brief review that our staff put together for this hearing. Last year, this is according to the Census Bureau, China accounted for 88% of electric hand drill and saw imports, 87% of air conditioning machinery imports, 83% of hydraulic jacks and hoists, 72% for cell phones and its parts, 58% of forklifts, 51% of lithium-ion batteries. The list goes on and on. Disruptions in these supply chains tell you that even after the virus is contained and starts coming under control, we could have shortages, and you know the industries that are relying upon this. This is where the spread of this is, becomes much more serious. So the focus is on three things that we really wanted to talk about. First is there the immediate consequence of not having the capacity to produce these essentials here at home. And small businesses are going to experience a great deal of economic pain as a result of supply chain disruptions. But there's also going to be increased demand for medical supplies and surgical masks and pharmaceutical drugs. And our small businesses can be a part of the answer to that, to filling in those gaps in the supply chain for critical sectors that have been exposed as weakened because of offshoring of our productive capacity to China and elsewhere. The absence of having these domestic businesses that can ramp up production to meet demand for these critical goods limits our ability to mitigate the worst effects of this virus beyond its broader economic impact. And the result is that the virus could end up being more damaging than it needed to be, and the economic impact as a result greater than it needed to be. As I pointed out earlier, we're already seeing this. One of the reasons why we've struggled to produce the testing kits is because we rely on foreign producers for the chemicals that are needed to make them. And there's a growing shortage because more people are testing, and as I said earlier, the countries that have it are going to be less willing to provide it. So I truly believe that one of the things we should look at after we provide the initial set is what can we do through the SBA, through the work of this committee, and it has to be bipartisan, there's no other way to do it, to help small business be a growth sector in our economy to meet some of this increased demand. Second, obviously, that we will discuss, and I'm sure you will point to, is the long-term consequences of the vulnerability, particularly when it comes to China. This wasn't the accidental byproduct of globalization. It's an outcome of a deliberate strategy on their part, which made biomedicine and high-end medical equipment a priority in their Made in China 2025 plan. They put it in writing. It's long been practiced. It encourages domestic companies and their predatory practices and provides a short-term bargain for foreign companies, but big-time costs for our nation and the world. For years, China's been able to entice American multinational corporations with access to its markets in exchange for offshoring and sharing intellectual property. And we've watched as Beijing captured critical portions of the global supply chain. Today, 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in the United States and the drugs that are here are sourced somewhere else. And a lot of that is China. And now, in the face of the pandemic, as I said, the absence of this capacity in the medical sector is endangering our healthcare system, and that is something we have to figure out in the short term and forever. So it's hopefully something that we are able to act on to find out what role can small business play in growth and in taking back the ability to make these critical goods in the United States right now and in the future. So I hope that we can come up with a second wave of proposals that will empower small businesses to bring their production of critical goods all in-house and getting American multinationals to buy domestically from them, not as a matter of economic protectionism, but as a matter of national security and national economic stability.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Rubio and members of the committee, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm here to talk about small businesses that are prepared to start production of critical medicines that are in short supply, that are needed to care for people who are hospitalized with coronavirus. The medicines I'm talking about today are generic drugs, and generics are 90% of the medicines that we take. Members of Congress take them, occupants of the White House. The focus is generic drugs. And right now, we are rationing in the United States of America, the term is on allocation, essential medicines, including critical antibiotics, that are necessary to treat hospitalized patients with coronavirus. I visited a hospital last week, and there's an antibiotic that they can no longer get. There are other antibiotics that are in short supply. There was a volunteer EMS worker who goes out on ambulances in her community, and she said they don't have epinephrine on their ambulance, which is used to revive people. I said, so what do you do? And she said, we just drive faster to the hospital. The $8.3 billion emergency package for coronavirus was an important step forward. There's support for research for vaccines for coronavirus, therapies to actually cure people with coronavirus. But there was nothing in that supplemental package to make, here in the United States, the essential generic drugs that are necessary to treat critically ill people with coronavirus, as well as critically ill people under normal circumstances in our nation's hospitals. China is the dominant global producer of the core chemicals to make thousands of our generic drugs. There was mention of the active ingredients coming from China and other countries. We have to look beyond the active ingredients. That's the data the FDA has. But what's missing is the core chemicals to make those active ingredients. For essential medicines to treat coronavirus patients, sedatives, pressors to raise their blood pressure, antibiotics, 90% of those core chemicals are sourced in China. There's talk that we should let the free market fix this. The reality is that there is no free market. Generic manufacturing has collapsed in the United States. There are only 2 Western companies left that are making generic drugs. And they announced last year they're dropping half their products because they can no longer make them. So they are on the FDA shortage list. And how does this happen? It's because patterns of China forming cartels, which has driven out production of so many of our core medicines. We can't make penicillin anymore because of what I wrote about in China RX, the penicillin cartel. We can't make vitamin C. We can't even make aspirin. And thousands of other medicines. And India put out its export ban because its giant generic industry, which supplies us with 25% of our generics, depends on China for those core chemicals. So what can we do? In doing this work on China RX, small companies have approached me, and these are brilliant people wanting to, prepared tomorrow to start using advanced manufacturing technology to make medicines fully made here in the United States that are in short supply. There is a precedent for the U.S. government to fund medicinal manufacturing, namely flu vaccines, through HHS and BARDA. BARDA knows how to do this. We could use that same model to make critical, essential generic drugs through BARDA, through public-private partnerships. They need investment for capital and for equipment, but the production costs of using new technology would make our drugs much less expensive.
In 2004, as Ms. Gibson has explained, the United States stopped making penicillin domestically. This happened without a vote in this body. It happened without decision in the executive branch. It was a decision prompted by China's Made in China 2025 plan to dominate what the Chinese Communist Party determined were strategic sectors which Chinese industry should control globally. And so we are here today to ask, on a good day, what does it mean to rely on the People's Republic of China for our basic healthcare commodities? Larry Wurtzel, a member of the U.S.-China Commission, will tell you about his blood pressure medicine making him sick because it was contaminated with rocket fuel in a Chinese manufacturing facility. Rocket fuel. Surgeons around this country may tell you about the hundreds, if not thousands, of surgeries that were canceled because millions of surgical gowns had to be recalled because they may not have been sterile when they were packaged up in the People's Republic of China and sent to the United States. This was in January of this year. Now, what if there was a malign intent? For example, what if this body passes a resolution demanding a high-level visit of an American official to Taiwan in furtherance of the Taiwan Travel Act of 2018? What if the United States chooses to sanction Huawei or another Chinese state proxy for the Uyghur suppression? What if the Chinese Communist Party decides to retaliate to these sovereign decisions by cutting off the shipment of medicines to the United States? Do you think it can happen? Ask the Japanese, who lost access to rare earth elements from the People's Republic of China in 2010 over a territorial dispute. The People's Republic of China's state-owned Xinhua, a Communist Party propaganda outlet, recently noted that the PRC could, and I quote, plunge the U.S. into the mighty sea of coronavirus, end quote, if it wanted to do so. I ask you to think about all of the tools of economic statecraft that you can use to support American producers, including small businesses and strategic